apologize. It was Ways and Means. We're trying to get broadband into the rural area, a very important issue that is very important to the state. So I left that. And, if I do get a call for a vote, y'all will have to excuse me to go down and vote for that measure if I do get a call. So no.
Hey, I'll be glad to take over.
Guys, we're gonna have a short subcommittee meeting. I do want to go over. There's a substitute to House Bill, Senate Bill 450 in your folders. I appreciate being able to talk about this issue. While I still think that there's important issues out there regarding baiting, I think that the long-term effect of baiting is a great risk to our wildlife resource itself, as a catalyst to spread what is invariably coming into our state, or will be here at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I still think that I've spoken to you about concerns with land, land issues and hunter issues. When we allowed supplemental feeding, 200 yards, all the way up to baiting, and now the rest of the state, we in essence gave deer hunters and hog hunters an exemption, which was a benefit that others didn't have. And I still have grave concerns about that. With that being said, I am going to hold to my word of what I told this committee, that if we have an adult conversation regarding this issue, that we will discuss, have an opportunity to vote. So before you is Senate Bill 450. If you'll turn to page 2, line 25. We talked about in this committee yesterday the 50 yards from the boundary. That was in the original 2011 bill that left the House. It came out in a Senate substitute. However, the 50-yard line or yard limitation was left in for purposes of shooting feral pigs. This puts it back in to the deer also. So now the 50-yard line, or the 50 yards from the adjacent property line, is now consistent back with pigs and deer. We talked about that the other day about how to mitigate. I think that will be probably one of the, hopefully an action. If everybody will respect the 50-yard line, it will probably help mitigate property line issues. Hopefully it'll take some burden off of LE and them trying to determine in those situations where we've got neighbor next to neighbor what the intent is. The other thing is if you look in 34, well, let's go back. Look at 31. We've made it, I think there was, remember the GON, talking about the blog, and people, what is it? What exactly is? I hope that language is saying that, hey, if you're gonna be the one that's gonna put out supplemental feeding or bait, you need to make sure that you're being conscious about not trying to do it and endangering an adjoining landowner or adjoining hunter on another piece of land. Okay, so all I do is trying to do is take and make sure that it was clear. That hey, if you're going to do it, you're being given a benefit or an exception to the baiting rule, that you're going to make it clear you need to be conscientious about what you're doing, because you're hunting for hogs and deer where everybody else can't hunt over bait. So at least it's going to make that hunter or landowner who is baiting for deer or hogs be conscientious of their neighbor and the respect for that neighbor's property and that neighbor's right to pursue game, in a non-baiting way. Obviously small game, migratory waterfowl, you can't do that. The other part that we put in was also on line 27. We did make a provision. I talked to Senator Harper yesterday. He talked about putting in if two adjoining landowners, agreed they were fine with baiting on the line, as long as they had it in writing, wouldn't be a problem. So we put that language in. Line 34, what we're trying to do from 34 down to 51. Remember we had talked about, I think it had been in your packets earlier, under current law, the rangers, if they come in and see a dove field that's baited, they've got the ability to go and find either the landowner or the person responsible and get them to remove it. Put this provision in as a way in which law enforcement, should they come across the situation that, we've got, even with the 50-yard line, or the 50 yards distance from the line, but if they do come across the situation where an adjoining landowner, is in a baiting situation, then these guys say, guys, please move. You're doing that already, if I'm not mistaken, or I hope you're doing it, even though I know you said there's not many occurrences of the conflict. But this is going to give you guys the ability to go out and just say, I'm baiting and Dominique's in trouble for shooting ducks. And it's outside the 50-yard line issue. These guys now can at least come in and say, David, you need to move it, rearrange it, get it up in a way such that it doesn't endanger Dominique's ability to hunt on his land and hunt ducks, small game, whatever it is. Okay. Line 55. This is regarding the CWD. I don't even think it's an issue, but the language regarding the diseases, certainly CWD or otherwise, it was may. We simply put that as shall. I don't think that's an issue, because if we get CWD, guys, our worst nightmare has come to fruition. You probably won't ever have deer in that area again, not for our lifetime. But that means that the board will do this, and they're going to, at least when occurrence, impose the ban on supplemental feeding or baiting. We changed the language. Obviously, I think it was just to update the language, line 62. Electronic means. I think the prior language was in there was that we were going to mail everybody in that county. Obviously, there are people who hunt in South Georgia that are from North Georgia. They're not going to get the issue or get the notice. We're going to, and certainly with what we've done, DNR has done with our online stuff, I think you're going to do this anyway. You're going to do a press release. You're going to put things out on the internet. I think this is just fits with what you're currently going to do should there be a disease outbreak. And then on 65, it's simply saying that, if you're legally baiting, it's not a defense anywhere up under law regarding, the disease of a communicable disease, because I know there's a lot of things with agriculture and things like that. So if you're going to do it, just make sure that you're, just know that if there's another part in this code somewhere, it's not a defense. We're not giving you a legal defense here of baiting. There's other parts with agriculture, with livestock and things like that. I don't know what else liabilities could be. We're just simply saying, hey guys, if you do this, defense of using this baiting as a section is not a defense otherwise. Section 2 is basically the same thing, but it's relating to feral hogs. Same language that we should find in section 1 with the deer. So again, we're marrying up two pieces where they're consistent. And then in section 3, I think this is very important. Remember, we talked about this. This was under 151. This was actually trying to strengthen our position against the anti-hunters interference with lawful taking of wildlife by another person by intentionally, and intentionally is a very high standard. Up under that standard is a reckless standard, and then up under that is not careless, negligent. So we're still not negligent, but if somebody, for instance, if somebody's, we got antis out there and these guys have already warned them, and they've already warned them, and they do it again, this is a reckless part. At this point, it's we're doubling. I want to double down on the antis out there. With that, gentlemen, that is the bill, and I think we've had a good discussion about it, and this bill will basically put the north and the south zones on parity in regards to baiting, but at the same time, I hope some of the changes in here will bring clarity to everybody out there regarding what the law is and what it isn't. I think the 50-yard distance will hopefully put a limitation on, I think, the conflicts to come. And again, guys, we're opening up. I say we, I'm not. But if this bill passes, you're going to see more and more conflicts in the northern zone because the land lots are much smaller. And hopefully this will keep neighbors good neighbors instead of creating rifts between neighbors. So with that, I'm up for any discussion on the bill. Hold on a second. Yes.
On line 23.
Hold on. Have you got it?
Yes, on line 23, where it says any game bird or game animal. What all game animals are we talking about? What?
That's existing code.
I know it's existing, but what?
That's all. In other words,
I mean,
the way the law is written, baiting or luring, if you will, has traditionally been against the law for all. So this is the same language that has been in there, I think, probably from the beginning of time. A game bird, a game animal means anything. And then if you flip to it, there's the exceptions, okay? If I'm not mistaken, am I reading this right? It shall be unlawful where hunters will be hunting. And then there's the exception, nothing in this code shall prohibit any person for placing, exposing, depositing, distributing, or scattering more than 50 yards from any property border. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
That was good.
Mm-hmm. Number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mm-hmm. So a lot to kind of take in with new language on the bill, but the broad concern I have is that I have not talked to anyone in South Georgia in as many years as we've been able to bait that has any of these problems, nor do any of the game wardens have any of these problems. So in my attempt to try to help North Georgia to be able to hunt in close proximity to attractant, bait, supplemental feed, or whatever word you want to use, I'm fixing to burden my folks. I'm fixing to hurt my guys. I mean, they ain't having no problems, and I'm fixing to strike this line 16 through 21 or 20 basically turns it into all one state, I guess is what that does when you strike that language. So I'm fixing to hurt my South Georgia guys, and the people I serve are in South Georgia. I love you in North Georgia, but I ain't hurting mine to help you. But line number 34 through 36, if I have somebody next to me that don't care one way or another about a deer, they don't care about deer, don't care if you kill them or not kill them, and they want to pour corn right down their property line, that ranger can't go tell them to pick that corn up because I want to kill deer.
Yeah, they can.
No, sir. How are they in violation of a law when they're not attracting deer or using it to hunt over anything? They're just feeding wildlife And then because I want to hunt, because I'm exercising my freedom to hunt, they've got to go take up all that 100 pounds of corn that they poured out just to enjoy feeding
Well,
and
first-
watching
fir-
wildlife.
First of all, Representative, if you look back at the history of baiting, there were two code sections, there were two sections in the original code before we did anything. And I'll let Colonel, if you care to, I mean, expand on this. Under the federal or the state, you had a prohibition against somebody actually doing the baiting. And then you also had another prohibition against somebody actually taking advantage and hunting over the bait. All right? That whole principle, is that still the principle that is out there, Colonel? Yeah. And that has always been, if I'm not mistaken, the history and the concept behind not baiting or enticing. Quite frankly, I read it from my perspective, Representative LaRicchia. I don't want, my worst fear is one of the things that when we, in 2011, and I hesitate to say this on film, but one of my worst fears was when the antis got a hold of this. And you had a neighbor that said, I'm going to do this on adjoining land. Or I've got a neighbor, and I'm going to stop them. If we don't give these guys the right to do that, then what is going to stop that anti or the person who hates you or loves Bambi, or whether it's quail, whether it's ducks, whether it's whatever, from putting you in jeopardy of now being overbait?
This language says that it shall be the duty of the enforcement ranger, whereas before we were talking about knowledge and intent and their discretion to try to figure all of that out. And my concern is, again, on the broader scale, is if someone has a small tract of land, 15, 20 acres, wants to archery hunt, and the area where they have timber that is sufficient to put a climbing stand happens to be within 50 yards, or just say the property on these small tracts is situated in such a way that they have to be 50 yards off the line.
No,
And
the hunter doesn't.
Right, the feed. But somebody next door that on another small tract just likes to feed, well, if I got to have my feed 50 yards that way, and then those people right there close, that don't really care about deer hunting one way or the other, that ranger, this law says that ranger has to go and have them remove it. What you just did, and I want everybody to understand what you just did to a property owner. You just made it mandatory that ranger tell Tarvin, even though that's your land and your corn and your dirt, you just took 100% of that person's freedom to do on their property
Are
what
you talking
they choose.
about hunter or non-hunter?
Non-hunter. If that's their
Well,
property,
look,
you
again-
just told them they have to take that corn and do it away and do away
Well,
with it
again, Representative,
because I like to hunt.
Representative, I think you're reading this completely wrong. First of all, where I will always side is with protecting the hunters of this state, bar none. The tradition.
Above private property rights.
Hold on a second. You talk about private property rights, well then, you can't have both. First of all, it's always been a law that you cannot bait or put somebody in a baiting situation. All right? That's been in law since forever. We already have it in code on the deer, on the dove part. I'm not changing anything. I simply lifted the language that was in the dove part and put it in here. That gives these guys.
On dove, I get it.
Well,
We're
what
talking
difference?
about deer.
What difference does it make? If it's dove, or if it's a deer, or if it's a duck, or if it's a turkey. What difference does it make? Tell me the difference between
Because
why
we are
you
trying to allow feeding for deer in this bill. We never did intend for this bill to do anything but move a deer hunter 200 yards. How we got off on the dove hunting in this conversation still blows my mind.
Then apparently, Representative LaRicchia, I thought we had a good conversation about the property issues with adjoining property owners, okay? This was nothing more than lifting the existing language that is a protection for everybody. One, I will remind you, we passed in 2006 a constitutional amendment to protect the right to hunt and fish in the state of Georgia. All right? We have always and will always protect that right. There are cases, there are things where people have entrapped other people with feeding on the line. Go back to your GON that everybody points to as far as the survey and go look at the comments. There was a guy in Atlanta that had a neighbor that put baiting on the line. Okay? They didn't want people to hunt on the line. The very situation that you are speaking of. I can go back and probably get the date and get the Colonel and LE to go back and pull the file. But I think that they called law enforcement. They had to go out there and clear that up. All right? So with all due respect, this is a protection against everybody. And I will go back to the point of everybody's going to get debate if y'all pass this bill, but it also is going to provide some protection for the person who is in a situation where they cannot hunt over bait, but now the benefit that is being extended, that has been extended in the southern zone, that will be extended in the northern zone, that benefit will not override an adjacent landowner's ability to hunt their own property for animals that are not or cannot be hunted on or around or near lures.
Well, that being the case, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to do that, then I would prefer you leave us alone in South Georgia and apply all these new restrictions to the new ability to bait in North Georgia. That would be my position.
We heard in committee, we talked about it with some of the land issues. This was already a bill that this House voted on in 2011. Were you here then?
I followed it all the way through with Chairman Shaw.
Okay. But this body voted for it, the House had already passed that version with the 50-yard line in it. We heard in this committee the issues of line hunting. In fact, my Representative Shaw was like, we need to look at hunting on the line, period. This is simply a way to mitigate the conflict when you've got two different types of hunting. One allows hunting over bait and one doesn't. I think it's a good measure. I think from what this committee has said in rebuttal testimony that everybody's not baiting anyway, or we've heard testimony in this committee that I'm not going to bait on the line because I don't want my deer on the line. Everything I hear is just it flops to whatever side somebody wants it to. I think this is a great measure. I think this allows for clarity. It protects those line issues and the conflict of interest, and it makes Georgia whole. It puts North Georgia and South Georgia on the same equal footing regarding being able to bait. It has one set of laws that applies to everybody. So if you live in North Georgia and you go to South Georgia, you know it, vice versa. But again, you voted on the 50-yard language in 2011, didn't you?
No, sir, I wasn't here, but I was in favor of the measure that was signed by the governor.
Okay. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the changes, particularly with regard starting on line 34, the part that's been added where it says that the ranger can remove the bait. So I just wanted to hear from maybe from the colonel or somebody. I was just curious because what if somebody like Representative Laricchia mentioned, what if somebody's just got a bird feeder? You've got a small tract of land and some lady's got her some bird seed and likes to watch the birds and walk around her property. I mean,
or even a farmer feeding his livestock.
Or you've got somebody hogging off a cornfield or something. How would that apply? I'm just curious because it doesn't seem like we could rightfully, do something without violating somebody's property rights. if they're not even hunting there. I mean, I'd just be curious to hear if that would be problematic, or from the department, if they feel like that's helpful or not.
No, I'm welcome to listen to the Colonel, Colonel, if you wanna come up, but I would also tell you that it's individual, so if we're not talking about the lady that's bird feeding.
But we're
Um,
saying that they
And if they're-
that the ranger shall impose that misdemeanor charge.
It says when a conservation ranger is aware or becomes aware that a clearly identifiable area of land or field is baited for deer in such a manner that hunting thereon would be violation of this paragraph, okay? So if we're gonna put in the 50-yard line and the colonel comes up, and somebody's baiting on the line without permission, the two written permission, what is he, this gives him the ability to go in there and say, look, we're gonna back it off, back your bait off to the 50 yards from the line. Otherwise, what do you have to stand on? So that's one thing, and then the other thing is if somebody is in a situation where a neighbor is baiting, okay, and the colonel says, look, you've endangered your neighbor. They know it, they can see it, it doesn't matter what, it's 100 yards, but there's no trees, there's no whatever. He has the ability to go in there and say, look, please move your bait so that you don't endanger your neighbor. It's that simple. It's the same language that's in the dove part. With that, Colonel?
Well, I'm going without benefit of reviewing what you're looking at, so, I may misspeak with some of this.
You wanna let him look
Oh,
at it?
sorry, Colonel, hold on a second.
You wanna let him look at that line 34?
Without a thorough review, the only concerns I've got with what you're talking about, we work really hard to have good landowner relationships. I don't want something that may cause us to have conflict with them, and I have not read this, so I may be missing that. I'm just going by what I've heard in committee today. That's a concern of mine, because we work really hard to have good relationships with landowners, leasees, hunting club members. From what I've heard, I'm hearing potential conflict there with some of what we're talking about. And again, I've not read through all this comprehensively, and I haven't even looked at it, to be able to articulate anything past that. That causes me concerns without a better review, honestly. Because I don't want our folks to have to be put in a position to have to, you know, if this does include the examples I'm hearing, the hogging off, the bird feeders, et cetera, and the landowner type rights that were discussed in the committee the other day, that has the potential to put us in a bad position. And that's from what I'm hearing out of the committee discussion today.
Well, then, if that's your case, go back and review it. We'll call another subcommittee hearing. If that's your case, then also come with recommending it, taking it out of the dove language, okay? Because it's the same language.
It is
that
the
in
same
dove.
language,
It is
you're
the
correct.
It is the same language, so why is it on one and not the other?
Well, the reason it was put into the dove language is because typically that's a hunting situation where you've got more than one or two folks that are hunting. They're invited to a dove field, may or may not know that it is specifically baited, trying to keep people, you know, that may not have an agricultural background being caught in a position to know, or whether or not they do know that that field's baited. That's the reason that was put into the dove language initially. That's why we were given that position to, when we become aware of the bait on that field, to go to the landowner and tell them they have to post it, to notify folks that it's a baited piece of property. And that's why it was put into the dove bait.
But again, you've got the ability to clear the bait. Why not just post the field and let it go?
That's what
Okay,
we
but
do.
but no, in here, you've got the ability to go tell them to remove the bait, okay? Not just post it so that nobody got in trouble that it was, you know, baited. The sign part in that is a clear warning, this is a baited field, don't shoot it,
That's
don't shoot
correct.
near it. So if somebody's got an adjoining field, they would probably be in a baiting situation too. Two landowners with just a fence row. I mean, I've shot those in South Georgia too, where there's basically two shoots going on divided by a fence row.
Fence row, sure.
Okay? And again, then why is the language of removing the bait in there? And again, my purpose is to use existing language that simply gives you guys the ability, should you, y'all testified the other day, when you're in there and you're using your investigative, what you're doing, you're taking all this into consideration, the individual circumstances, determining intent, who's trying to do what, determining intent. But when you find the ability, you find the situation where bait needs to be removed, that you've got the ability to say, look, please pick it up. Let's move it to clear your adjoining lane, owner. The other thing is if with the 50-yard distance from the property line, that's the other thing. What's under code that says you've got to move it? So therein, again, you've got the ability to say you're on the property line. Your owner is over here shooting ducks or turkey or whatever. Move it, okay? They want to shoot on their line. Move it. So I'm not sure why that tool that we're giving you to go in there, you don't have to exercise it. It's just if you do find where it has put a violation of Section 1, which is either the 50-yard line or the 50-yard line, the 50-yard distance, or it is a neighbor's in a baiting situation, why wouldn't you want that tool?
Well, and I was going by what the representative said, that the rangers shall do that. And again, I've not read this. That word concerned me.
Do you think if we changed it to may, then that would give you the flexibility to make a good case-by-case common sense decision?
That would help, anytime you put the word shall, that makes a difference.
Back to knowledge and intent.
We still have to do that no matter what.
An investigation of the whole.
We still have to prove knowledge and intent no matter what, because that's what the courts require of us. And that may eliminate that. And again, I'm talking without review of this bill, so I may be speaking out of turn. I'm going specifically off of the discussion that I'm hearing here today.
First time I've seen it too.
The questions? Who's number 5?
He covered exactly what I was going to ask.
50 yard.
Questions?
I had one, but some of them have been answered.
On the going back to line 27, where you got where the 50 yards language is in there, where it says unless otherwise agreed to in writing by adjoining property owners. Would you entertain that if you just have an agreement there that it doesn't?
That was Senator language, word for word.
Mm-hmm.
So
I had talked with him about that as well, and I think he'd agreed to take the in writing part out.
Well, I talked to him yesterday afternoon. I wish he would have talked to me as we were doing it, but again, I was trying to be accommodating, and
Well, if you enter at the appropriate time, I'll be glad to make a motion on the amendments, if the chair will allow.
Can I make one brief comment before he does that? Just all right, Mr. Chairman. One of the situations that we have in South Georgia a lot of times with huge tracts of timber and is undergrowth and gallberries and all these things. A lot of times the clearest, most open shooting lanes are two-path roads that parallel property lines. You can't see to the left, you can't see to the right, but right down the property lines, 300 yards, clear sight. A lot of hunters will put up a deer stand at the crossroad or the T. Well, naturally, they're going to have that feed. I'm telling you, they're going to have that feed about 150 yards or closer down that road. If you agree to 50 yards in these huge tracts of timber in South Georgia, Corbett, would you say you gonna cut out 10% to 20% of some of those feeders on those long boundary roads? I still am concerned that we ain't got no problems in South Georgia, and I'm fixing to vote to give us some.
Well, that'll be your prerogative. You know, we sit here in subcommittee, and I heard a motion, wanted to
I had never
entertain
seen
a
the
motion.
language, Joe. This is the first time I've seen the language.
We talked about this yesterday.
You gotta see a
That-
bill.
that- I understand that, but you also talked about the language that was in the bill that Jason sit here yesterday in subcommittee and talked about entertaining a motion of putting the 50 yards in.
For North Georgia. I didn't say, we never talked about was that gonna be the whole state.
Well, we're-
I like my deal.
Unfortunately, the problem is that the hunters in South Georgia all want the same rules, and we want to be consistent across the state. That's what I've been getting from everybody, is the reason we need this, and the
Yeah,
very
we
reason
wanted
you
North
get
to be
is
like
is
South, not
consistent.
change everything.
But we also talked about the inconsistencies and some of the issues that were in this bill. And I'll go back, 2011, this House voted for a 50-yard, 50 yards from the adjacent boundary line. So that's also what was discussed. I believe it was Friday. When did we meet? When was the last meeting we had? Thursday. I believe that was also discussed in our subcommittee. In fact, didn't you?
I mean, we were just thinking out loud. I mean, I honestly
So,
don't agree. I think 50 yards is way plenty if we agree to move in that direction.
so.
But I still think that this, on 34, that section is problematic for our rangers.
Well, I'll entertain a motion for a May, but I say that, I wish the colonel would have the time to
Here's what you.
look at the language, because all I've done is simply lift the language from the dove hunting to here and to the hog hunting.
But he just mentioned why the dove language is that way. It's specifically because of dove hunting. You fixing to implement dove hunting language to deer hunting when the colonel of the Department of Natural Resources Law Enforcement Division said the reason it was dove hunting language because it was specific to dove hunting. You fixing to put dove hunting language on deer that has,
No,
Does not have the same
I
application.
disagree with that.
Well, he just
It's
said it.
language that's in there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that language does not cover other situations. And I've sit here and I've told you, the reason that language is in there is to give him the ability, when he finds that we have a hunter who cannot hunt over bait, but is now being subject to and is knowingly in a baiting situation because a neighbor who is hunting hogs or deer, okay, has put that innocent neighbor, that innocent hunter, in a position where they can't hunt. That now gives Colonel the ability to say, you need to go and move your bait. Didn't you just say, Representative, didn't you say you had an issue with baiting the other day? That you had to call the ranger? And
Years ago.
yeah.
And, during turkey season, we just call the game warden, they just came and moved feed.
what this does is it give them the ability. It says, hey, you got to move it. If you don't move it, you argue with you. We got an ability to charge you as a misdemeanor. I'm not so sure where that is
If that-
going.
Mr. Chairman, if that's changed from May, shall to May, I think that will eliminate a lot of the concerns we're talking about here, and allowing a little more discretion on our officers' part.
That's all I'm trying to do, is give you a tool in which you can come and say you've joined somebody else and you shouldn't have. Please readjust. You still got the ability to bait, but you can't do it in a manner in which puts your neighbor at risk of being in a baiting situation. Is that?
So that would change, would help tremendously from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Would that make you feel comfortable?
Yes, that gives us some more latitude on how we enforce that piece.
if we can take out in writing and may.
No, the issue is the May. I don't know how it. We're not. Let's talk about that issue. Any? Jason.
Present on the subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, I just want to be clear, this language affects both the northern and southern zone, is that correct?
It's all.
All, right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Didn't we, you and I, just for the committee's edification, you and I spoke yesterday about the adjoining landowners agreement in writing, that if they agreed amongst themselves in writing, that was an exception that you wanted?
We did discuss that, and the only part that I was hung up on was the in writing part, but
I question that just because
I was-
have a hard time getting some people to get together and put things in writing. You know, if you got a disagreement, they gonna know about it. You don't have to. Basically, if you don't have anybody complaining, then you don't have a problem.
I mean, we discussed the property owner piece, and that was what I
And,
brought up to you.
but we did do in writing, wasn't that what the words we talked about?
I don't know that we might have discussed that, but I didn't, I told you that I was working on some language on that. I don't remember us agreeing to those exact terms, but I'll defer to your recollection, but,
All right, gentlemen, you wanna take that out, you can take the writing out, but there has to be an agreement. And if you wanna do the may, you can do the may.
Can I make a motion?
You may.
So we're gonna take the writing out,
Let's, hold on a second.
All right.
We're gonna make a motion.
Could I ask a question before he does, Jim?
What we're talking about, the shall and the may, on line 55, we're tying the colonel's hands there as well, telling he shall impose a period of 1 year, not leaving it to their discretion.
One, that's not the colonel, that's the board.
The board, I mean, it's,
That's in a case of a documented disease.
I understand, but you're taking away any discretion they would have.
I would think that if CWD, it is, the protocol is, you know, we've set a minimum. We didn't, that was it, okay?
Yeah, but that's-
I think by all documentation that I've seen from Mississippi and all other states, it's not a matter of a year, it's probably gonna be forever if I had to guess. In most states, they will ban, if you ever get CWD, they will ban it. What about, bovine tuberculosis or brucellosis?
John Bowers, Chief of Game Management, went over this last week when kind of summarized our response under our CWD response plan. With these communicable diseases, one of the first actions that we are going to take under those plans is to prohibit feeding and baiting in that county and all adjacent counties.
So with the language here, shall impose for, up to 1 year, is that restrictive in against any of the what the actions or the current
No,
regs are?
It doesn't say up to 1 year, it says 1 year. It says off.
Or more.
It struck, or more.
Struck up to.
It didn't say up to 1 year, it says 1 year.
For 1 year, well, a year, whether it's
I mean-
365 days or 366 is for a year.
Could we
Okay.
ask the colonel his opinion?
Well, one, this, hold on, I wanna finish my. So from a response from the department, please proceed with where we were.
Under our disease response plan, again, if we have an outbreak of a communicable disease, one of the first measures we're going to take is to prohibit feeding and baiting, because that's a risk management tool in that county and all adjacent counties. And that rule would be in persistence until we can resolve that communicable disease is no longer a problem in that area.
So if that's what they already do, then why would it be necessary to change it from may to shall? And change up to 1 year to 1 year or longer or extended?
That whole plan and that time is gonna be at y'all's full discretion at that time anyway, correct?
That would be correct.
My question is anything in this language over and above what you would do?
No.
And again, let me ask, let me ask this committee, if CWD breaks out, what is the policy that you think from a committee perspective, outside of the board, how long should it be if it's CWD? Have you thought through
Didn't
that
we
one?
hear testimony that it took like 5 months to take those 64 samples and test all of them on that case in Mississippi? Where am I remembering
No,
that it took 5 or 6 months to collect those 64 samples?
No, the Mississippi only happened in January, so that couldn't be a 6-month issue.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that level, those specific details, but I do know we'd collect the samples necessary. We send them to the lab, we get the results back. Of course, lab time kind of varies, depends on what their current load is. I mean, they're not just working for one state, they're doing this for many states. If we were to get a positive back, we always keep some extra sample. That would be retested again, because we want a double confirmation. If we get a positive confirmation and then the second one is ambiguous, then we go with the first one, because we don't want to play around, want to be conservative in our approach. So, and generally they can turn that stuff around pretty quickly.
What period of time would you need if you had a confirmed test? What kind of turnaround time would you need?
As quickly as possible.
Yeah, but
Would it take you a year?
Yeah, but
No.
hold on a second. If you have a confirmed test, I think your question is incorrect. If you have a confirmed case of CWD, it's not a matter of we're gonna go back to baiting within 6 months or whatever after you confirm your case. It is a matter of you are doing everything in your human possibility within the department's resources, within the state's resources, to contain the disease so that it does not spread to surrounding counties. Am I off on this? I don't think I am. So the issue of the baiting, I'm not sure why you're coming back down to a minimum time. The issue is, if it's baiting, if you've got CWD, the fastest way to spread this, besides a vehicle going 70 miles an hour down the road with a contaminated deer in it, is through bait or lure or feed. In the states that have CWD, Mississippi, they just not only did they issue a ban on baiting and supplemental feeding, they now have issued a ban on on trapping hogs, and that the only way you can trap hogs is to have the bait inside of a cage. That's how restrictive the bait is going forward, because they're trying to contain a disease. So the question here is, as a policy for this committee, if you've got CWD, what is the minimum that this committee wants to make sure that they can't come back and bait? If it's CWD, it's probably going to be forever. But if it's tuberculosis, or what is the other one? There's a couple other ones that will wipe out the deer just as quickly. Or if it's, what is it, bovine tuberculosis?
Tuberculosis is one of the other ones, and it would continue until testing of both deer and of basically cattle in the area. I mean, that would be a concern for our agricultural producers until it showed that it wasn't present anymore.
Well, what would allow the minimum would be the word may. That way, if they could do it in 10 months, they could do it in 10 months. The word shall closes it for a year regardless.
If I may, is your concern for me whether the word may or shall matters? It
That-
doesn't.
That is the.
In this respect, it doesn't.
Yes.
I think where we kinda got off track was when I was asking the question about the may or the shall to Colonel Henderson, I was referring to the section starting on line 34 and not the shall and may.
I agree, and
question.
again, I think we've got, we're wasting
You see what I'm
time
saying?
from hearing another bill, but yes, I don't think that was in the
So
question.
Colonel Henderson, what I was talking about on changing that shall to a may that you said would help was actually dealing with that whole section on, starting on 34, dealing with that adjoining landowner. And there's a shall on 36, on 40, on 45, and on 48. And I would really feel better if legislative council weighed in on that.
Guys, yes, I don't have no problem with that.
Changing,
That's, the colonel thinks that they can exercise the tool, I have no problem with that. So if you wanna make that motion, you are recognized to make that motion.
well, I'm asking of Paul, should we change the shall in all of that section, those 4 different shalls to may, in lines 34 through 51 that have been added?
And, Representative, if the concern is the ability of the department to make decisions based on the information in front of them and not be sort of hamstrung.
Mhm.
I believe those first 2 instances of shall deal with that, and quickly reading through, I believe the other remaining instances of shall deal with other issues,
Right.
not that issue.
That's what I was thinking. So I would make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we change the shall to may in line 36. And the same, change the shall to a may in line 40. And strike in writing on line 27.
No, on 40, is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, I misspoke. It's just that first instance.
It's that first instance, because again, if Colonel comes to the conclusion that, hey, you need to move this bait, he's got to be able to then enforce his, should he decide, okay, then you do need the enforcement power of, I can charge you with a misdemeanor if you disobey the order. Is that correct?
You're correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
So I'll change that motion to just the changing the shall to a may in line 36 only. And again, the striking the in writing on line 27.
I'd also, would your motion also pertain to line 82?
Yeah, thank you. So to make it consistent with our feral hog language, I would like to add that on line 82, that shall be changed to a may also.
Okay. All right, we're coming. Any, huh? All right.
And striking this on the in writing on 76 too.
Set, the in writing on 27. Is that correct?
That's correct. And,
All right.
And in writing on 76.
So we got a motion on line 27 to strike the words in writing. Line 36 to strike shall and replace it with may. Line 76 to strike the words in writing. And on line 82, to strike shall and replace it with may. Is that your motion?
A second.
We got a second. Any other discussion regarding the motion?
Is that the only amendment that's gonna be made to this bill?
That's as far as I'm,
I think Corbett is right. I think anytime you allow those guys.
first of all, we've got a motion, that we're entertaining, okay? Is there
Right.
any other discussion regarding?
Yeah, I don't think the
motion?
motion is correct. I think you need to still strike may on line you need to strike shall and put it back to may on 55. And then take the strike out of up to and including and leave it like it was, previously.
Well, we'll. I'm not recognized for that. I think that's a policy decision that this committee needs to make as far as the CWD outbreak. We've heard from the department that at a minimum, this would not affect the decision that would be made as far as the closing. And it's setting a minimum by which it should be. Any other discussion? We've got a motion on the table, and we've
Can-
got a,
In regards to his question though, as far as wouldn't the plan that DNR's got built in to deal with CWD, wouldn't that be what takes effect anyway?
well, then if that's the case, why is this language, this was the language that the department put in here on time periods in 2011. So if there's an argument over time periods and you're making the argument that it's gonna defer to the department, why are we even arguing about whether it's
I know.
a year or not a
We're
year?
getting lawyered up here a little bit. I was just wondering if we had if it said may, then it would allow them the flexibility to really implement their established CWD plan that they continuously update. He did say that.
Well, then that would be that you have to say the same thing in reverse. Why change it? It's not fair to ask one and not ask the other. If it doesn't hurt, then it doesn't help.
Because when we're making policy, okay? This legislature is elected to make policy and to look at issues, okay? So we do have a say-so in this. Otherwise, we'll just turn it over to the executive branch and let everybody else make decisions. In every other committee, this legislature puts policy decisions, and our discussion into it.
But the
So-
reason
so-
we have this board is so they can make some decisions.
Representative, I'm not gonna sit here and argue with you. We've got a motion on the floor, we've got a committee that is here, and I'm gonna apologize to the senator, regarding his bill. We will call a committee hearing in the morning. I do want to, we've got a motion and a second. What is the will of the committee on the motion, as far as the amending this LC 440895S? That did not include 50, yeah, no. All those opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Now back to, is there any further discussion? I'll entertain a motion on the committee substitute as amended, Senate Bill 450.
All right, I'd like to amend the substitute, the amendment, to take shall out on 55.
All those in favor? His amendment.
I just make a motion that we leave that may on line 55
Give a
for the
second.
department
I
to do.
second.
Any other discussion?
Want your amendment to include line 56, up to and including?
May fixes that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Call the question on the Senate Bill 450 as amended.
Move to pass.
Second.
All those in favor, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Bill passes out of subcommittee. We'll deal with, we're out of time for the next committee. We will call a different, Senator, I apologize for not getting to the full committee. We'll call another subcommittee, and we'll let you know when that bill will be on. We are adjourned.